Turn the other cheek. A cyclist friend was riding along recently. Someone pulled alongside and rolled down a window and yelled at him. These things do happen from time to time. A young woman yelled at him, "Get off the road, boomer!" She wound up her window and took off. How dare you, he thought. How dare you? I am sick of being treated like this. Now, this happened the way these things typically happen. There was a bend in the road. He went around the corner, and there was a red light, and the car was sat at the red light. He rode up, pedaled, pulled up to the side of the car, and wrapped his fingers on the window. I'm not taking this anymore, he thought. She wound down the window and said, "What the do you want?" And he said, "How dare you keep treating people like this? How dare you say such things? I'll have you know, I am definitely a Gen Xer and not a boomer." Walter Wink, in his book, Engaging the Powers, talks about turning the other cheek. He says that by striking a person with the back of your hand, deemed to be of lower socioeconomic class, it was a way of asserting authority and dominance. And that if the persecuted person turned the other cheek, the one who was disciplining was faced with a dilemma. The left hand was used for unclean purposes, so a backhand strike on the opposite cheek would not be performed. An alternative would be a slap with the open hand as a challenge, but this was seen as a statement of equality. So by turning the other cheek, the persecuted was demanding equality from the oppressor. That's a theory, but I'm not especially compelled, to be honest. Refusing to use your left hand because it's unclean against someone that you regard as inferior? That doesn't make a ton of sense to me. It seems a bit too neat and tidy to me. Now, I've become suspicious, as I'm sure many of us have, of one-size-fits-all explanations of texts like this. In part because Wink is assuming that the attacker and the attacked will view the action of a slap and of being slapped through the exact same lens. That in this moment that one would assume is incredibly heated, someone is being slapped after all. Both parties are thoroughly thinking through all of the implications here. I think turn the other cheek is connected to the praying for your enemies saying. It is an ideal, an ethic that one should strive for, and that, in fact, these verses are presented to ask anyone what spiritual objects are in their way from living out actions such as these. I'd like to turn the other cheek, but we might think. First, you'd have to ask yourself if you actually ever have wanted to turn the other cheek. We live in a culture where the ego, the power of the I, the individual, is celebrated, worshipped even. Why would you want to turn the other cheek? Why would you want to pray for your enemies and bless those who persecute you, unless it was a strategy that you developed to turn the tables on your opponent in order to make yourself look good? Would you want to go the extra mile? Would you want to give your cloak as well? Would you want to pray for your enemies? What would life look like for you and for others if you were to follow such a path? Is there a greater truth that Jesus is trying to help us see? My assumption is that Jesus doesn't offer this as a strategy for getting opponents to do what you want them to do. You don't turn the other cheek so that they will stop hitting people. You don't pray for enemies so that they'll become your friends. You do these things because they bring life rather than death, love rather than hate, and stop cycles of violence, even if only temporarily, because you are not seeking immediate revenge. And yet this is all very unfair, isn't it? How do you talk about these things as a philosophy in a vacuum? When applied contextually, we find that one size does not fit all. Turn the other cheek? What are the power dynamics? Where is this happening? And in defense of what would I turn the other cheek? Is someone being abused or victimized or oppressed? It can be a helpful exercise to see how, because Christians have seemingly been alternating between trying to get to the bottom of these verses and completely ignoring these verses, other traditions might view turning the other cheek and see how they reflect them back to us in the church. There's a little book called The Sermon on the Mount According to Vedanta by Swami Prabhavananda, and within that we hear this story. There once was a holy man who came to a village. The villagers warned him that he must not go along a certain path because a venomous snake, which had killed many people, always lay there. "It won't hurt me," said the holy man, and continued on his way. Sure enough, the snake approached, rearing its head and hissing, ready to strike. But when it saw the holy man, it prostrated humbly at his feet. The sage taught the snake to give up the idea of biting and killing. According to instructions, the snake, having received initiation into spiritual life, crawled off to its hole to pray and meditate, and the holy man proceeded on his way. Soon the boys of the village discovered the change in the character of the snake. Knowing that it was now harmless, they would attack it with sticks and stones whenever it came out of its hole, but the snake would never strike back. After a while, the snake grew so weak from its injuries that it could scarcely move. Only rarely at night would it come out of its hole to eat. When next the holy man came to the village, he was told that the snake was dead. "That's impossible," he said to the snake. "It cannot die until it has attained the fruit of the holy word." He went to the snake's hole and called it. Hearing its teacher's voice, the snake came squirming out, crippled from the blows that it had received, and terribly thin because it was not getting enough to eat. The holy man questioned it about the reason for its condition. "Revered sir," the snake replied, "you asked me not to harm any creature. I've been living on leaves and fruit. Perhaps that's why I'm so thin." The snake had developed the virtue of forgiveness and had forgotten that the boys had done what they had done. The sage said, "No, there must be another reason for your want of food that is responsible for this condition, so try to remember." So the snake recalled, "Oh yes, some village boys. They beat me, but I wouldn't bite them. I just lay silently and suffered their torments." The snake expected to be praised for not resisting evil. To its great surprise, however, the holy man became quite cross. "How foolish," he said. "I told you not to bite. Did I tell you not to hiss?" While Jesus, we assume, was not aggressive in the Gospels, this does not mean he was not assertive. And for matters of justice and protecting the rights of others, he did plenty of hissing. That to turn the other cheek does not mean being passive. To pray for one's enemies is not to be a pushover. To bless those who persecute you does not mean to be agnostic about the persecution. But to move towards realizing the kind of world that we want, someone has to give up their guns. Someone has to be willing not to solve problems with biceps and fists. Someone somewhere is going to have to be the peacemaker. We have on occasion tried to remind ourselves of this when we introduce the chancel steps. We've said somewhere someone is kind when others are unkind as the children come forward. Somewhere someone shares with another in need. Somewhere someone returns good for evil. Somewhere someone serves another in love. Somewhere someone is calm in a storm. Is that someone me? Jesus, I'd argue, pushes us further and further than we'd ever imagined in this journey towards a place where we bless others spontaneously as a matter of nature, where we pray for all people and all peoples as a matter of course, that we'd act in love as a first step rather than as a final strategy to get what we want. Our priorities ought to change, our motivations ought to shift once we are blessed with this wisdom. And yet it is so hard to absorb. I've long appreciated Fred Craddock, the famed preaching professor at Emory for many years, who said, as an older man, "When I was in my late teens, I wanted to be a preacher. When I was in my 20s, I wanted to be a good preacher. Now that I'm older, I want, more than anything else, to be a Christian. To live simply, to love generously, to speak truthfully, to serve faithfully, and to leave everything else to God." We will often fail in this endeavor, but there are, in fact, also times where we can see how Jesus' ethics might be lived here in this place, where beauty is brought to the fore, where love is realized, where hope is seen, and where people actually do reflect the goodness that Jesus tries to engender in humanity. And so to that end, I invite Catherine to please come forward at this time as we celebrate our awards.